The Gambino family. You've heard the name, whispered in hushed tones. They're one of the 5 families that rule New York City's underworld. From the glitz of Manhattan to the back alleys of Brooklyn, their influence is felt. Founded by Carlo Gambino, a cunning and ruthless mob boss, the family rose to power in the mid-20th century. They built their empire on fear, violence, and the endless pursuit of wealth. Their story is one of power, betrayal, and the seductive allure of the American dream, twisted and corrupted. This is the world we're diving into, a world where loyalty is tested and danger lurks around every corner.
Salvatore Salmancuso wasn't your typical wise guy. Sure, he had the slicked back hair, the gold pinky ring, and the 1,000-yard stare that could silence a room. But beneath the tough exterior, Sal was a family man. He adored his wife Maria and doted on his 2 young children. His days were a strange mix of the ordinary and the extraordinary. He'd wake up early, have breakfast with his family, and then head out to work. But Sal's office wasn't your typical 9 to 5. He ran a construction crew in Brooklyn, a front for the Gambino family's more lucrative operations. Extortion, loan sharking, illegal gambling, these were the family businesses that paid the bills. Sal was a good man, you know. He did what he had to do for us. He always made sure we were taken care of no matter what. Sal's presence in the neighborhood was undeniable. He was both feared and respected. Local shop owners knew him by name, and he made sure they knew who was in charge. But he also had a softer side, often helping out those in need. On Sundays, you'd find him at church, a devout Catholic who never missed a service. He'd light a candle for his late mother and pray for his family's safety. Family gatherings were sacred to him. Every Sunday dinner was a feast, a time to bond and share stories. Laughter and love filled the room, a stark contrast to the dangerous life he led outside. But once the family time was over, it was back to business. Meetings, negotiations, and sometimes confrontations. Sal had to navigate a world where trust was scarce and betrayal was common. He was always on guard, knowing that any moment could be his last. But he had a loyal crew, men who would lay down their lives for him. In quiet moments, Sal would reflect on his choices, the path he had taken, and the legacy he would leave behind. He knew that despite the danger, everything he did was for his family. And as he walked into the sunset, he carried the weight of his world on his shoulders, living on the edge every single day.
Sal was a good man, you know. He did what he had to do for us. He always made sure we were taken care of, no matter what.
The Gambinos, like any other family, had their own set of rules and traditions. Loyalty was paramount. You lived and died by the code of silence, Omerta. Betrayal was punishable by death. At the head of the family sat the boss, the Don, the ultimate authority. He ruled with an iron fist, his word law. Below him were the underbosses and capos, each controlling their own crews and territories. Sal was a soldier, a made man, a trusted member of the family. He reported to his capo, who in turn answered to the underboss. It was a complex web of power and influence, built on trust and fear in equal measure.
Construction was the perfect cover. It wasn't just about building structures, it was about building an empire. It allowed the Gambinos to control unions, skim money from contracts, and launder their illicit profits. Every brick laid was another dollar cleaned. Sal's days were spent overseeing projects, collecting debts, and making sure everyone stayed in line. He was the enforcer, the one who made sure the gears of the operation ran smoothly. But it was the side hustles that brought in the real money. These were the ventures that kept the cash flowing and the power growing. A friendly game of poker in the back of a bar could net a small fortune. High stakes, high rewards, and always under the table. An insurance policy sold to a reluctant shopkeeper ensured their business thrived. It was protection, but at a price they couldn't refuse. And if someone crossed the family, well, let's just say problems had a way of disappearing. The Gambinos had their own way of dealing with issues, swift and silent. Sal justified it all as providing for his family. Every dollar earned, every risk taken was for them. He saw himself as a provider, not a criminal. He wasn't hurting anyone who didn't deserve it, he'd tell himself. It was a mantra he repeated to ease his conscience. But deep down, the guilt gnawed at him. The faces of those he had wronged haunted his thoughts. He was trapped in a life he couldn't escape. The walls were closing in, and the weight of his choices bore down on him. Sal knew there was no way out, but he kept moving forward, one step at a time in the shadows of the Gambino way.
Section 5. Highs and lows, notable events and turning points. Life in the Gambino family was a rollercoaster ride, filled with dizzying highs and crushing lows. One day you were on top of the world, celebrating at a lavish wedding, and the next, you were staring down the barrel of a gun, your life hanging by a thread. Sal had seen his fair share of both. He'd experienced the thrill of success and the terror of imminent danger. He'd celebrated at lavish weddings held in opulent banquet halls, surrounded by made men and their glamorous wives, the epitome of mob life's allure. But he had also witnessed brutal beatings and cold-blooded murders, the dark side of the life they led. The price of disobedience was etched into his memory, a constant reminder of the stakes. And then there was the day his best friend Frankie The Rat Calabrese turned informant. It was a betrayal that shook him to his core. It sent shockwaves through the family. Betrayal cut deep, especially when it came from someone you considered a brother. The trust they had built over years of shared experiences and secrets was shattered in an instant. Arguments erupted, alliances were questioned, and the once unbreakable bond of brotherhood was tested like never before. The mob boss had to make tough decisions, balancing loyalty and survival, knowing that one wrong move could spell the end for them all. Rebuilding trust was a slow and painful process, but it was necessary for the family to move forward. They shared drinks, stories, and tried to find common ground, hoping to mend the fractures that betrayal had caused. In the end, the Gambino family stood united, stronger for having faced their trials together, but forever changed by the events that had tested their loyalty and resolve.
Section 6. The feds are watching. Interactions with law enforcement. The FBI was a constant shadow, always lurking in the background. They tapped phones, planted bugs, and leaned on informants, desperate to bring down the Gambinos. Sal had his share of run-ins with the law. Traffic stops that turned into intense interrogations, questioning about a person of interest who happened to be his cousin. He knew the feds were building a case, but he kept his mouth shut. He had to. Snitches get stitches wasn't just a saying in their world. It was a way of life, a strict code they lived by.
Section 7. The walls close in. The Teflon Don Falls. John Gotti, the dapper Don, had taken over the Gambino family with a flair for the dramatic. He loved the limelight, a stark contrast to the low-key approach of his predecessors. But Gotti's arrogance would prove to be his downfall. His flamboyant lifestyle and constant media attention drew unwanted scrutiny from law enforcement. The feds were determined to take him down, no matter the cost. Sal watched as the walls closed in on Gotti. The Don's inner circle crumbled under pressure from the feds. One by one, they turned state's evidence, their loyalty bought and paid for.
Section 8. The price of loyalty, a life behind bars. In 1992, John Gotti was convicted on multiple counts of racketeering and murder. The Teflon Don, once seemingly untouchable, was sentenced to life in prison. His fall sent shockwaves through the Gambino family and the entire Mafia underworld. It marked the beginning of the end of an era. Sal, despite his best efforts to stay under the radar, was also swept up in the crackdown. He was convicted on racketeering charges and sentenced to 20 years. He traded his life of power and influence for a 6x8 cell and an orange jumpsuit.
Section 9. A changed world, the Gambinos in the 21st century. The world outside kept spinning while Sal sat in prison. The Gambino family, once a formidable force, was a shadow of its former self. The old ways were gone, replaced by a new breed of criminal. The rise of the internet and globalization had changed the face of organized crime. Traditional rackets like gambling and loan sharking were now competing with cybercrime and international drug trafficking. When Sal was finally released from prison, he was a man out of time. His children were grown, his wife had passed away. The world he knew was gone. He was a relic of a bygone era. Section 10. Legacy of Shadows, the enduring mark of the Mafia. The Gambino family, like all families, leaves behind a complicated legacy. Their story is a cautionary tale of ambition, greed, and the corrupting influence of power. But it's also a story about loyalty, tradition, and the fierce bonds of family, however twisted they may be. Salvatore Sal Mancuso, the once feared mobster, faded into obscurity. His story a reminder of the human cost of organized crime. The streets of New York City may have forgotten his name, but the shadow of the Gambinos still lingers. A reminder that even empires built on violence and intimidation eventually crumble.